In this week's tutorial, I'm going to show you how to make an amazing hydrogen alpha image from your monochrome camera. And this is what I got once we made it through the end of the workflow. It turned out really well. I've never gotten a horsehead photo I'm happy with until today. And it was really amazing to see the H-alpha data come out of here. Now there's one really important thing we got to do at the start though, and we have to make sure that we stack our images correctly. This is something I didn't show you in last week's video because I wasn't aware of it. I just learned this today. So it's really important that you follow along here in the beginning. Otherwise, you're gonna have problems. This was my very first attempt editing the photo. I like the way the nebula came out, but the stars look horrible, especially if you compare them side by side. You can see they're not right. And that's just because I didn't stack them correctly at the very start of my workflow, and it caused me all these problems. So I want to make sure really that you understand this concept, and that'll help you get a much better image. First, let's head over to Deep Sky Stacker. That's what we're going to be using today. And then what we need to do is go to Open Picture Files, like normal. From here, if you're using the ASIR Pro, it's already going to put everything in the correct folders for you. It's actually really nice. So I've got my horse head, bias darks, and lights. And then I just pick whatever the first filter is. So in this case, it's a blue filter. I didn't take very many because the horse head sets fairly early in the night, and I wanted to make sure I got at least a few of each color channel. But we'll start off with blue in this case and hit open. Then we can hit check all, click on any one of these, bring up a preview. And if it's too dark to see anything, if you come up to the very upper right, you'll have a little slider. Just move the gray point over to the left until you can kind of see what's going on. All right, now that we've loaded in all of our light frames, this is the most important step you got to make sure you do. Otherwise, you're going to run into the problems where the stars don't line up, and you're going to have all kinds of headaches. All you have to do is go back to Open Picture Files and select any one of these photos that you took. Although you're probably better off choosing a red, green, or blue image rather than a narrowband because you'll have more stars, and therefore it should be a better reference frame. So very simply, I'm just going to pick the last green filter here, image, and double click on it. Now if I come down to the bottom of the list, we can see it's added in here. This is the only G. The rest are all my blue filter images. But when I click on this, I want you to just keep your eye right on this big star here. Don't look away from this. See how the star is very slightly shifted back and forth? I'll click on blue again, and then I'm going to click on green. My whole point here is that this is going to be our reference frame, this green filtered image. That means it's going to move all the stars directly to the spot on every single color channel, and that's going to make our life a lot easier. All you have to do to make this your reference frame is right click on it and choose Use as Reference Frame. Make sure you don't actually check the box though, because remember, this is, in this case, a green filter image in a blue stack, so we wouldn't want to throw that in there with the rest of the stack. And if you're still a little bit confused, this might make more sense once we go through the entire stacking process. But again, you can pick really any photo you want. Just make sure it's actually sharp, because sometimes you might have a blurry photo in your stack. This one looks fine. And then again, just right click on it, Use as Reference Frame. Don't check the box though. All right, so I've loaded in all of my blue filter images and our reference frame, which happens to be a green colored filter image. Then we need to add in our darks, flats, and bias if you have them. I'll click on my dark files. I only took 16 on this night. I was going to take more, and I kind of got lazy, never did, so 16 should be just enough, I think. Not really a lot of fixed pattern noise anyway. And then we'll go to the offset bias files. You want at least 100 of these, if not 200. Load all these up. Once you've added in your bias, darks, flats if you have them, light frames, and that reference frame, now we can worry about the stacking. So we'll go over to Registered, Checked Pictures. I normally use the best 90% just in case one or two of the photos was blurry and I didn't catch it. It's up to you though. Then we'll go to the Advanced tab and hit Compute Number of Detected Stars. In this case, it found almost 1,500. It's kind of a lot, but there are quite a lot of stars, so that's probably going to be fine. It doesn't take very long anyway with these FITS files. Then we'll go to Recommended Settings. In this case, I only took 11 light frames, not exactly a lot, and it doesn't even give me the option really to use the Sigma clipping, which is normal. So I chose median. If you have more images, you can use some of the other options. And if you just click on the blue hyperlink, it'll switch it over. So that's how you do that. But that looks good. I'll hit OK. You could also click on stacking parameters here and just go through all your tabs and do everything manually if you want to. But usually just look at the recommended settings and do that. Then I'll hit OK. Hit OK again. And this is your last chance to make sure everything is correct. You can see I only had about 20 minutes for this colored filter. I'd like to get much more than that, but first night out doing this. And look very closely and make sure you don't see any red text. In my case, it's telling me I didn't take any flat frames, but I don't have any vignette. I don't have any dust. So for me, there's no point taking flats right now. Sometimes though, if you took your bias frames incorrectly or dark frames incorrectly, it'll give you some red text and warn you. And that's why I just want you to look over the screen very quickly, make sure there are no error messages, and then we'll hit OK. At that point, it's going to start our stacking, and then we can continue on. All right, that didn't take very long at all, probably only a minute, and Deep Sky Stacker is done. Now, once it's finished stacking, we're going to come over to the left under the Processing tab and hit Save Picture to File. Otherwise, you're going to have to rely on those crappy autosaves that are 32-bit. We don't want those. And then I usually just create a folder called TIFF. And then in here, I'm going to save each one of my color channels. So red, green, blue, H alpha, etc. In this case, this was the blue filter. I already have it though. I'm not actually going to save it, but you hit blue, save. Then we've stacked our first image. We got blue. Now we need to repeat that for green, red, and hydrogen alpha. So we're going to go back to register and stacking in the very top left. Then we're going to select all of our blue images. Hold down the shift key to click on the last one. So I've only selected the blue filter images. I'm going to right click and remove them from the list. I didn't remove that green reference frame though. We want to keep this in the stack the entire time. Otherwise, you're going to have problems. So make sure you do not lose whatever you used as your reference frame. Leave it in here along with your bias and darks. Now we're going to go back up to Open Picture Files, and then we'll move down to green, and we'll select all of our green images. Now we need to, in this case, scroll all the way down to the bottom of our list. Click on the first image that is green. Hold down the Shift key, click on the last one. Then we can right click and check those. And there we go. So we have pretty much the same exact stack, except we swapped out the blue images for the green, and we still have this reference frame. You do not want to lose that. But we're going to repeat that process. We'll go to Register Checked Pictures, take a look at our recommended settings. Everything should still be good. We'll hit OK. Make sure there's no red text. We'll hit OK. And then it's going to go through and it's going to stack all the green images. Once it's finished, we'll be back in this screen here. We'll go to Save Picture to File, name this green. Then we'll do the same thing. We'll go to Open Picture Files. First, let's get rid of those greens at the very bottom. So click on the last one, hold down Shift, click on the first green, right click, remove those from the list. So all I did is I got rid of the greens now. Still have this reference frame though, I'm not getting rid of that. Then I'll go up to Open Picture Files and grab all of my red images. Don't forget to go down to the bottom, check them all by right clicking. Repeat this process and then clear this out and add in your hydrogen alpha as well. I'm not going to spend any more time on this because you guys should know what you're doing by now. Then once you have your RGB, maybe even L, and more importantly, hydrogen alpha stacked together with all the same reference frame, that's the most important part. This reference frame cannot leave the stack at any time. Then we can continue on to Photoshop. Now that we're here in Photoshop, we'll go to File, Open, and then I'm going to go to my TIFF folder and select my red, green, blue, and hydrogen alpha stacks, and then hit Open. And if you did everything correctly in Deep Sky Stacker, as you go from tab to tab, the stars should not move hardly at any amount at all. If we look here, we see our red, green, and blue. The stars are in exactly the same spot. The hydrogen alpha moves just a little bit though, because I made a mistake. I got rid of the reference frame and I didn't remember which I used for the reference frame. So that's why I was so adamant about that earlier step. I don't want you to have the same problems I did. So that's the first thing to do, just click on red, green, blue, and hydrogen alpha, and make sure the stars do not move. If you did things incorrectly, then let me show you what you'll see. So if we go to these guys here, this was the first time I did it when I didn't use that reference frame. So see now if I go from each one, they're jumping like crazy, especially the hydrogen alpha. That's what caused me all those problems. So if you see the stars jumping as you click from tab to tab, you know you screwed up. Go back, rewatch the beginning of the video, and make sure you keep that same exact reference frame throughout each stack. But if you did everything correctly, all the stars are going to stay in the same place. And now what I'm going to do is just clean everything up and we'll move on. All right, so we've got, again, our red, green, blue, and hydrogen alpha all open in Photoshop. Now we're really getting it into the workflow. So you can choose either red, green, or blue to start with. It doesn't matter. Since I'm on red though, we'll just start with red. On this particular image, we're going to go up to Image, Mode, and change it from grayscale to RGB color. That way we can paste in the other two color channels. So just click on RGB color. Then we're going to go over to the Channels tab over on the right here. In this case, we're on red, so we know we need to put in green and blue. Therefore, let's click on green here, so it's highlighted. Go to our green TIFF tab. Then we'll hit Control or Command A. You should see some marching ants. Then Control or Command C to copy it. We'll go back to the red tab. Make sure we're on the green color channel if that's what we copied. Then we'll paste it in with Control or Command V. And the good thing is we made sure to line up all our stars in Deep Sky Stacker so we don't have any problems there. Now we need to click on blue. Go over to the blue tab, hit Control or Command A to select everything, Control or Command C to copy it, go back to the red tab, make sure you're on blue in this case, and then paste that data in with Control or Command V. All right, so we now have red, green, and blue. And if I click the little eyeball next to RGB and zoom in, there's no weird fringing. So that's a really good sign. Now, what we can do is go back to our layers right here, and we can start stretching the image. I'm going to grab a levels adjustment, and then I'm going to move the midpoint over to the left. And we can actually see the Horsehead Nebula there. It's pretty good. Then I'm going to go back to my adjustments, hit Control, Shift, Alt, E. Again, that's Command, Shift, Option E if you're on a Mac. The reason I did that is because it makes the image less pixelated. We can always delete this layer later on. It's just kind of a safety measure, if you will. Again, that's Control, Shift, Alt, E, or Command, Shift, Option E. I'd recommend you write that down because we use that a lot. Then we're going to go back up, add another levels adjustment, and just stretch the image a little bit further. I think right there looks good. And then I'll hit Control, Shift, Alt, E again. All right. I mean, that actually looks pretty good when you consider I only had 20 minutes of data for each color channel, and that's just RGB, not even any H alpha. So, I mean, you could be happy with that, frankly. But, of course, today we're going to try and add in that H alpha data. So now what we want to do, once you've gotten your image stretched like this with your RGB data, now we can continue on and look at the H alpha information. All right, so let's go over to our H alpha tab. And in this case, because my gain was too low and I wasn't taking long enough exposures, it looks completely terrible. So all we have to do is go to our adjustments, grab a levels adjustment, take the midpoint, move it pretty far to the left. It's going to look pixelated. That's okay. Hit Control, Shift, Alt, E. And let's do that again. New adjustment, levels, move it over. And look at all that data there. That's really amazing when you think about it. That was just with the H alpha filter. And that's still, I was blown away the first time I saw that. But we'll do Control, Shift, Alt, E one more time, add one more levels, and I just want to make it a little bit darker. Like that. You can even say that's a pretty cool image on its own, but of course we want to do more with it. When you're finally happy with all your levels, we'll hit Control, Shift, Alt, E, And this is now our stretched hydrogen alpha image, just like we did with the RGB. Although with just RGB, you can't really see any of that amazing detail that you can with the H alpha filter. And this is really where things are going to start to get confusing. So I'm going to try and go through this as thoroughly and slowly as possible, but there's plenty of written articles online that explain how to do this as well if you just can't grasp the concept, and that's totally normal. So what we're going to do now is we're going to go back to our image that we already edited with our RGB colors. From here, let's go to the Channels tab, click on the red color channel, so we're only targeting the reds. Then we'll hit Control A and Control C. What we're doing is we're copying all the red information and we're going to paste that on top of our hydrogen alpha image. So we go to the Layers tab again. You need to make sure that you hit Create New Layer here. If you forget to do that, you're going to paste it on top of this. It's not going to work exactly the way I want it to. And then we'll just hit, once you've added a new layer, we're going to hit Control or Command V to paste that data in. And in my case, I'm going to double click on the name this red, and this is our H alpha, just so you don't get confused. Now the problem I have is that at the very start of the workflow, I did not include the same reference frame for the H alpha, and you can see that the stars moved. If you did everything correctly and you followed my instructions, then you won't have this issue. If you messed up though, or something happened and you have the stars moving, all you have to do is click on your red, hold down the Control key, click on your hydrogen alpha so they're both selected, then go to Edit, Auto Align Layers, because sometimes you get some rotation and you have to do it this way. So if you hit Edit, Auto Align Layers, just hit OK. And if it did everything correctly, let's turn on and off our top layer. Now there's no motion, so that's good. We know it did a good job aligning things. Again, most of you shouldn't have to do that. I just screwed up, and that's one thing I have to deal with. But once we've added in this red color channel on top of our H alpha, now let's lower the opacity from 100% to maybe 20 or 30, because we don't want to cover up all that information. We want it still there. So I'm going to go right about 20% for the red on top. At this point, we now have what's considered a hydrogen alpha plus red image, because we copied and added in that red data, but only at about 20% opacity. That way it didn't cover up all that detail. Ultimately, what we're going to do is we're going to take this information, put it back on this photo right here. But the safest way to do this is once you've added in your red data on top of your hydrogen alpha, and the opacity of the red channel is at 20% roughly, now let's save this as a new TIFF file just so we don't get confused. So I'm going to hit Control Shift E, or you can just right click and hit Flatten Image. Then make sure you go to File, Save As. And we're going to save this as a new TIFF file, which will be HA hydrogen alpha plus red, or however you want to name it. And then we'll hit Save. All right, now that we have this layer here, we can hit Control A, Control C. So we're going to copy everything. Then we'll go back to our main image that we were working on. And you might have to go turn on your RGB again if you haven't done so already, so you can see everything. And now what we're going to be doing is kind of the confusing stuff. So let's walk through this very slowly. What we want to do now, if we still have the H alpha plus the red image copied, is we're going to go to our red color channel here and paste it in. So just hit Control V. And again, make sure when you do that, that the stars didn't jump around. And if you turn on the other color channels, you can see that in my case, they did move a little bit. See how they're not lined up? You shouldn't have that issue, but in my case, I'm just going to use the arrow keys to move everything very slightly. Now all the color channels should align. You shouldn't have any kind of fringing or anything. So that looks good. Now we zoom out. Look at that. That already looks way better. Let's do a before and after of that. See how ugly it was before? Now it really killed any kind of weird color cast. We have a nice dark sky. We have that beautiful red color, that deep red. And we added in even more of that fine detail. And all we did is we copied all of our H alpha plus red data, and then we pasted it in for the red color channel. So we overwrote the old red color channel with the new data. And there we go. That already looks really good, I think. But we can take things even further. So for this, let's go down to our lower right and add in a new layer. I'm going to name this hydrogen alpha. Then, if you hit Control or Command V, you'll paste that data in. What we want to do now is change the blending mode, in this case to difference, just to make sure everything's still lined up. And then use your arrow keys to move everything around as closely as possible. Looks like right there. If you're trying to use the arrow keys and it's going crazy on you, it's because you have difference still selected. See how there's like this blue bounding box? So if you hit the arrow keys and it's doing all this kind of crap, make sure you just hit the escape key. That way this is no longer blue. And then you'll be able to move it around. But again, hit escape key so this is no longer blue. Now use your arrow keys, make sure all the stars are lined up. Hopefully you don't have to do that. In my case, I do though. Then, once you've got everything lined up, we'll change the blending mode to luminosity. Once the H alpha data is on top, the blending mode is luminosity. Now we need to lower the opacity of this layer to maybe, I would just do whatever looks good to you. Because the thing we're watching out for is that it doesn't get this ugly faded pink. So probably 30 to 60%, somewhere in there, depending on what you want to go for. I think I'll leave it right about 40%. There we go. From here, we're going to start doing some curves to further bring out that red color. Let's start off on our RGB layer. I'm going to click on my Adjustments tab and then add in a curves layer. And for this to work properly, I recommend creating a clipping mask. You should be able to just hold down your Alt or Option key, move between your curves and your RGB layer, and you'll see the icon changes as long as you have Alt or Option held down. Once you get this little icon though, just click with your mouse. And we've now created a clipping mask. This is only going to apply now to this specific layer. It's a really useful tool, just in general, actually. Then what we want to do, make sure we're on RGB up top here. That way we're affecting the brightness of the image. Then click and add a point near your histogram here and move it up or down and see what looks good. And in my case, moving it up really brings that stuff out. If I move it down, it doesn't look as good at all. So I'm going to bring it up just a little bit, like that. Now let's do the same thing for our H alpha. We'll click on it, go to our adjustments, add in a curves layer, then we'll hold down the Alt or Option key, click in between the two layers, creates a clipping mask. It's only applying now to the H alpha, not the entire image. From here we can do the same thing, move this up and down and see what looks good. In my case, I actually like moving it down. And also pay attention, like if your point's way up here versus down here, it might affect the image more than you realize. So try moving it all around, seeing what you think looks best. I think right about there looks good. At this point, we have a pretty good image. I'm just going to put some final touches on it, crop it, and we'll call it a day. All right, so now what we're going to do is go back to our adjustments, and this time I'm going to add a global curves layer. So I go back to my curves, add that in. This time there's no little arrow. We're not creating a clipping mask. So when I do this, it's applying to the entire photo. And really all I'm going to do is click on the hand tool up top here. Zoom into our nebula. And maybe I want this to be a little bit brighter. So I'll click and drag that up. Then of course we don't want the horse head getting too bright. So we'll click and drag that down. Then we'll zoom out. And that looks really good, but I feel like I killed some of the data. So now what I'm going to do is go back to my adjustments and add in a levels adjustment. From here, I'm just going to move the midpoint over a little bit and then the black point over a little to the right. Just so everything looks good to your eye. It's not too bad. You can always lower the opacity too. Finally, I'm going to go to I'm going to add another curves. And it's possible you still have a weird color cast to the photo. So if you click on the black dropper, it's the top one of the three, and just select anywhere in the photo that should be dark black. Right here, for example, and click. Let's zoom back out. And you can see that really had a big impact, but I don't like that it made the image darker. So if I change the blending mode here from normal to just color, now it's only affecting the color. And in fact, you could argue it looked better before the color change. So if you don't like it, you can always click on your black point again and click somewhere else in the photo and just keep clicking until it looked good, making sure you have the eyeball turned on, of course. And this is the easiest and fastest way to fix a color cast. Also a very quick way to ruin a photo, but you can always delete the layer. So that looks good to me. Yeah. The only other thing left to do, I think, is a noise reduction. So if we hit Control Shift Alt E or Command Shift Option E, it's going to create a new layer on top of everything. You need to make sure you do that. Then we'll go to Filter, Camera Raw, Filter, near the top there. And this is a great way to reduce noise without needing any other plugins or any extra crap. So if we zoom in, I noticed we had a lot of color noise right here on the horse head. If I go to the Detail tab, I can just move the color slider over, in this case about 10, and it just killed that ugly color noise very easily. You could always go a little further though. It's up to you. And there's also luminance here. That will soften the image and get rid of some of that hard grain. And then if that looks good, we'll zoom out. This is also an easy way too, if you go back to your main tab here, to maybe add some contrast or less contrast. If you want to try bringing up or down the highlights, maybe bringing up or down the shadows. This is a very easy way to do things, especially if you're still new to Photoshop. So it's worth experimenting with this. Maybe even add some texture in here or clarity. You're better off doing that more precisely though. That's something I get into more in my courses on my website. But for now, that looks good to me. And I'll hit OK. I got one special trick for you I'm going to share with you today. If you go to the Selective Color now, this is how you can really get those reds exactly the way you want. So I chose Selective Color. This is the bottom row, second from the right. That'll bring up this window here. Then all you have to do is move these sliders left and right. And look at that. You can really make that red pop. Just be careful though, because if you go too far, you're going to completely saturate the photo and you're going to lose actually some detail. So it's better not to overdo it. But at the same time, it is a lot of fun to see what you can get out of these with a little bit of work. And there we go. Now we have that beautiful red color rather than kind of the pinkish stuff it was before. That looks really good, I think. That might actually be my best edit yet of this. This is my third time. All right, once you're happy with this, now we can finally crop it. Could have done it before, but we'll click on the crop tool, come up to where, in this case, it says 16:9 and put it to original ratio. Then before you do anything else, make sure you turn off and uncheck delete cropped pixels. That way you can always come back and recrop it if you don't like it. From here, I'm just going to crop out the borders, which weren't looking good. All right. Then I'll hit the check mark. And there we go. That looks really good, I think. Now, I'm going to leave you guys with one question. Maybe you guys can help me out here. I have these ugly halos around the stars, and I think it's just because I was using the ZWO RGB filters. I'm assuming if you get higher quality filters, you won't have that issue. Although I know these stars in particular are pretty troublesome because they're so bright compared to everything else. So if you guys want to leave a comment and let me know what you think about those flares, any tips on those, I'd appreciate it. But that's pretty awesome. I think I'm really happy with that. And that's all I got for you today. So I hope you enjoyed the video. I want to thank, there's a website, Star Arizona. They have a full written out walkthrough of this. It's more or less what I followed to get here. So if you just type in H alpha RGB on Google, it's one of the top links. And that's kind of the way you can follow along if you're kind of lost after watching the video. But again, thanks to them for that very detailed workflow. But yeah, that's my very first hydrogen alpha image. And I'm really happy with the way that turned out. The Flame Nebula looks really nice and authentic. The Horsehead Nebula, you have that beautiful red color, the hydrogen alpha detail. And before we go, I want to show you my very first version of this using a DSLR probably a year or two ago when I didn't really know what I was doing at the time. And we'll compare those side by side. And here's my very first photo of the Horsehead Nebula. This was taken just with a Nikon D750, Skyguider Pro, and a Tamron 150-600. So all things considered, it's not terrible. Especially, I only had maybe 30 to 45 minutes of data and not really a lot of light, especially with that camera. So, I mean, at least you can see the Horsehead there. That was my very first attempt. Second attempt looks a lot better, I think. A little oversaturated. But this was taken with the Space Cat, Nikon D750, Skyguider Pro. This time I had the auto guider, though. That really helped to allow me to shoot longer. And with a lot of tweaking, I was able to pull out the Horsehead fairly well with a stock camera. There's no mods here at all. No filters or anything. This is just straight out of the camera, more or less, and a lot of editing. But the interesting thing is, we see this huge scene here, and this is cropped even still. This was the Nikon D750 and the Space Cat. And our final image here, this was the Space Cat, same optic, but with a little monochrome sensor. And it fills the frame much more than it did with the full frame camera because the pixels and the sensor itself are smaller. And I covered that in some of the earlier videos in the course. But anyway, I've gone on long enough today. So now that you know how to add in the H-alpha data, you can really have some fun and bring out all this detail that otherwise you probably wouldn't have captured with a normal camera.